It is such an honor to meet you. Thank you for this opportunity. Could you please go ahead and introduce yourself? Just say hello, your name is.
Yes. Hello, my name is William McGregor, and we live in Bonneville, Alberta.
I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today, sir. Just a couple of things before we really get into the interview. This is going to be a talk about your early life, your time in training, and your time overseas. Even though you've shared some of the stories before, for our purposes today, I would really encourage you to pretend you're telling it for the first time. You're going to get a copy of this for you and the family, and then we'll share a version online.
And does that start from before I joined the Army?
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about life in the Great Depression.
Yeah.
But the main thing is, I want you to know that I know you did have some tough experiences in the war, and I'm not going to make you talk about anything you don't want to talk about.
No.
But I would really encourage you to try to be as open about what it was like, because the only good thing that will ever come from what you guys had to go through overseas is if someone learns from it.
Oh, yeah.
So that's what we're trying to do today. If you don't mind, I'm going to have you lift up your foot, please. It's got to get the microphone. So, but don't worry about the camera. Don't worry about the lights. You're just going to look at me, okay?
And just keep talking.
We're just going to have a conversation. So, if you don't mind, go ahead and tell us where and when were you born?
I was born in Northern Ireland, Moore, Northern Ireland, and at 2 years old, my family moved to Canada, and we settled at Vermilion on a farm there, but things were pretty hard times in the 30s. It was no price for the grain or whatever you grew, you couldn't sell it. I have a bill here for my dad had shipped 3 steers to Edmonton. They were £1,000 each, and he got a bill back from the CNR Railroad for $6 freight. The steers didn't pay the freight. He still owed $6 for them. So that's how you know how low the prices were for cattle. And but after a few years there, they decided to move north here to the homestead in the Sandy Rapid area of Alberta, and we moved in 35. The spring of 35, we moved to Sandy Rapids, and I went to school there for a year or a year and a half or so to finish up, and we
Tell us a little bit more. When you make it to Sandy Rapids, what kind of things did you do on the farm?
on our farm, well, it was mostly whenever we took a home, my dad had taken a homestead and my brother had taken a homestead, and they built a house, of course, out of logs, and most of the buildings were log buildings, and it was just more or less to make a living. You kind of lived off the land. You didn't buy much in the store. They picked berries and they had meat from the land, and we also had some cattle, so they would butcher a cow or a calf, and this way they survived. And there was no much taxes to pay or mortgage or anything to pay, because they only paid $10 for the quarter of land, which was 160 acres, and they didn't have much debt to pay, so they just had to live. It wasn't much trying to work out at some other job. The wages were so poor. You were getting $1 a day, that's all you would get for wages. And before the war, I worked at St. Paul at a farmer, and we worked for $1 a day in the summer, $30 a month in the summer. In the winter, it was $15 a month, 50 cents a day. But you did get your board and a place to sleep, so it wasn't too bad. But after we joined the army then, it was John, my brother, he went first to the army, and then later on Robert went. And then after that, the same year I went, in 42, I went to the army. And we went overseas in July, I guess it was. I went overseas, and we, after training in Edmonton for 2 months, then we went to Camp Borden in Ontario for two or 3 months, and we then went overseas. There wasn't too much place for soldiers to stay in England. It was so full of soldiers, Americans and all nationalities were in England there with armies. We landed at Aldershot first, or at Greenock, Scotland first, and then we went to Aldershot. And from there, we needed a place to stay, and they just loaded us on trucks. And you went down the street in the town, and they just said, you stay this house, you stay that house, you stay that house. The people had nothing to do. They couldn't say you couldn't go. So we just lived with the people in England. But we didn't board with them. We went to a community kitchen, the army kitchen, to eat. And we trained there till we went to Europe in June of 44, I guess. Yes, in June of 44 we went to Europe and into Normandy. And then I was with the Essex Scottish. I was attached to the Essex Scottish, and we traveled all the way through to Germany. But the main fighting was, the biggest battles was in Normandy, on the beaches and in the cities of Normandy, that they had lost so many people. The wounded was very high, and the dead was very high numbers.
Just hang on 1 second. You're doing incredibly well.
Yes, I was attached to the Essex Scottish. I was with the RAP, the Regimental Aid Post of the Essex Scottish. And there was a doctor there at the aid post, and there was a padre, the minister, the padre, he stayed with the doctor at the aid post too. And myself and the rest of the people that was attached for putting up stuff or putting the tent up. If we needed a tent to put our RAP in, it would be Essex Scottish people, soldiers. I had a Jeep. They gave us a Jeep and a driver, and my main job was picking up casualties at the front. Mostly putting the first bandage on, but not always, and bringing them back as far as the RAP, where the doctor would check them, and then the bigger ambulance would be able to get there and take them further back to the hospital or wherever they had to go to. And in the early parts there, we were had them to a clearing station, they called it, and then we were hauling them with the Jeep to the shore, where there was barges coming in with more soldiers. And whenever the soldiers would get off, well, we would load on wounded soldiers, and they would be taken back out to the hospital ship that was out in the channel. Other than that, the war in Normandy seemed to slacken up. The Germans pulled out or were killed, and we ended up in Dieppe, which was a city and town that the Essex Scottish in '42 had a big raid on, and they lost a lot of people. So they had a big graveyard there. So we stopped there for a day, and they had church service at the graveyard, and then they decided that they had to get a port to get more food in and ships, bigger ships in, because some of the ports that they had got were damaged so bad that they couldn't get ships into. And so the Essex Scottish Regiment was loaded on top of Churchill tanks. They were the British Churchill tanks, and they headed for Ostend in Belgium, and we went about 100 miles the first day because they didn't stop to fight. They just went. And if the Germans put up a fight, well, then the tanks would take care of that, and if not, they just passed everything and went. And we got to just outside of Ostend, and but I'll tell you, we were stopped on the side of the road in the evening, and there was lots of mines and that on the sides of the road, so you had to be really careful. But there was a lot of civilians that were leaving Ostend and coming out on the roads trying to get out into the country because they were scared there was going to be a lot of fighting in Ostend, and they might get killed. So, but this lady, one lady and two daughters were walking on the road, and with the tanks and big trucks and that on the road, they walked in the ditch, and she stepped on a mine, and it blew her foot off, and we happened to be right close there with our Jeep, so we attended to her and got her on the stretcher, and the two girls, and I took them back to where the doctor was, towards the back end of the convoy, and he looked them over and he said, the only thing, we have to get her to a hospital, and the hospital is over 100 miles back in France. So he said, there's a hospital 2 miles ahead, but you have to go through the German lines to get to it. And he said, you don't have to, but if you would do it, volunteer to do it, she would live to survive. Otherwise, if we put her off on the side of the road, she's going to die for sure. And so we said we would take her, and the driver and me, we had her on the stretcher on the Jeep, and we just started out for the hospital, and it only took us about 10 minutes or 15 minutes straight down the road, 2 miles. And we didn't see any Germans. They probably seen us, but we didn't see them. And we went right into the hospital and give her over to the doctors. And they took care of them, but they asked us to stay and have supper with them. And we did. And then they said, well, it was already dark then, and we couldn't go back to our unit because we would probably be seen by the Germans, and it's hard to say if they would shoot at us or what. So we thought we'd stay till they caught up to us in the morning, and they would be coming in the morning. So they give us a bed, and after supper they give us a bed and play, and a bath. They said you could have a bath, and it was so nice to have a good bath. And But the next morning we woke up, and here all our clothes had been washed and ironed and nice and clean, stacked beside the bed. The nurses had done that during the night while we were asleep, and it was very nice. But we had breakfast, and then shortly after that we went to look for where the RAP of the Essex had been set up. We didn't know where it was, and we didn't have phones like you got now, that you could phone. You just had to look for signs, and we just went to the main road, and we did see a sign where to go, and we followed it. But somehow these Germans had blown up the docks in Ostend, and so they decided to go on to Antwerp. So it was a big rush to get to Antwerp, so there wasn't too much fighting, but they got to Antwerp, and they did save the docks at Antwerp from being blown up. And that's in Holland already, and so part of Antwerp is in Holland. And we, from then we just stayed around there at Christmas. We had Christmas in Antwerp, and after Christmas they started to move towards Germany more, and they finally, in February or so, they were right at the borders, and that's where I met my brother there. He was with the Calgary Highlanders, and he had been wounded in France, but he went back to England and got better, and he got better, and they sent him back to his unit, the Calgary Highlanders, and they were marching up the road or walking up the road, moving in to take over from the Essex, which had been fighting all night and trying to get through the German lines, but hadn't succeeded. They were in this big forest area along the Rhine River. But John come along the road, and he seen the Essex sign on the side of the road, so he stopped to see if I was in there, and I was. I was sitting on a stretcher and inside the tent, and we talked about for 15 minutes or so. And he told me about getting married in England, but he went on to. He said, "Oh, I got to hurry up and get back to my platoon. They're still going." So he was behind. So they off on the run he had a Bren gun over his shoulder, and a soldier with him to carry an ammunition, boxes of ammunition. And that's the last time I seen him. John got killed about 2 days later in crossing, trying to get through the Siegfried line and into Germany. But I didn't hear about it or know about it till about a month later, or over a month later. My sister had wrote me from Canada that they had got a telegram from the Department of Defense saying that he had been killed in action in Germany. So he must have been into Germany before he got killed. But that's the way we found out about it.
What was that like when you got that letter that John had been killed?
Well, you were very, very sad, of course, to hear it, but I mean, you're so busy and so gone, and so many people get wounded, and you're taking care of them. It seems your mind just can't think of one thing at a time. You're just going. We ended up in Germany after quite a ways into Germany, close to the coast. And we were in a farmyard. There was a long laneway going up into this yard, and there was trees on both sides of it. We were camped in the farmyard, a German farmyard, and there was a big machine shed there, and the guys pulled the machinery out of it and just took it over, and they set up the RAP in it, and the rest of us, and there was not much casualties right then, so we were just sitting around, and 2 or 3 days later, there was still nothing doing. They just said, don't shoot unless you have to, and so they were just sitting, and whenever the guys had been through a lot, and here somebody tells them, do nothing, only sit around, things get pretty annoying, they're looking for something to do. So one of the guys that was my driver, he spotted a German big pig in the pen, and the guys were needing something to drink. They had nothing to drink to celebrate the end of the war. And so he said, well, we should butcher this pig. We take it out and we'll sell it, and I know where to sell it in Antwerp. And so he shot the pig and butchered it, and we wrapped it in a blanket and put it in a stretcher and put it up on top of the Jeep. And I was standing up in the Jeep holding across the pig, and we headed for Antwerp, and never asked anybody or told anybody about it. And we got to the Rhine River, and it was only traffic one way across the Rhine River on a bridge that they had just built across there with boats. They put boats down, and then bridge material on top of the boats so the vehicles could drive across. And we got there, well, we were flying the flag, the Red Cross flag, and our Jeep, and the MPs, the military police, they stopped all traffic, and till the river bridge was cleared, and then said, let us go. And we went across with the pig and went to Antwerp. And he went to the back door of a cafe there that he knew the people there, because he had been in Antwerp for quite a while, and he liked to go for a drink he was glad to see the meat, and he gave us a bunch of whiskey, cases of whiskey, and of course we headed back, and no trouble getting back, but we got back to our camp. Well, the doctor in the meantime had heard about us, what we'd done, and the old German had come to feed his pig, and pig was gone, and he kind of put up a fuss, and somebody told him to shut up or he would get the same thing. And but anyway, we got back, and so decided that evening we would have a little party. But we just took a few bottles, and the rest was left at the RAP station. And I don't know how everybody knew about it, but that evening, officers were coming from all over. And before midnight, they were singing and happy, singing Old Lang Syne before midnight. And they drank most of the whiskey. And
what was that like for you to find out the war was over?
To find out the war was over was a great. Well, I thought we'd be going home. You know, the war's over. We're going to go home. But what happened is we didn't go home. I was sent back to my unit after a few days. They got the thing signed and everything, and I went back to my unit, and then I was expecting to go home because there was some of the other guys were already leaving to go home. But the doctor come along, one of the doctors, I had known him because he had been up to our RAP to relieve our doctor and let him out for a rest. And I did know this doctor, and he said, "You're coming with me, and we're going out we have to go with the British Marines out to the North Frisian Islands, because German submarine base there, and they're surrendering. They haven't surrendered yet, but they're going to surrender. They hope to surrender to these British Marines when they get there." So we went. I went with him, and I was out there 6 months at the Frisian Islands before I got word that I could go home, and then I went back to Belgium, and then we went back to England, and then we got home on it was just before Christmas I got home. So I was out in there for about 6 months but these submarines were coming in every day, so there were submarines coming in every day, and some of them had sick people in the submarine. So their main crew would be taken off the submarine, and their submarine, the British soldiers and myself mostly, would go down into the submarine and see these were people that got a disease called Bang's disease, and they couldn't walk, but there wasn't really much wrong with them, but only they couldn't stand up, and we had to take them out on a stretcher, and it's hard to get somebody out of a submarine on a stretcher. You have to go straight up pretty well. But we had lots of help, so we worked at that for a couple of months. There were submarines coming in. And then whenever they got the people unloaded, the British just towed the submarine out into the ocean, fired a shot through it, and let it sink. And I guess the crew was sent back to Germany then. But I got home for Christmas anyway, and then later on we went back and then got discharged from the army.
Could you please tell us about seeing your family for the very first time?
Oh.
Could you paint that picture, Mr. McGregor?
Well, first time I got discharged in Calgary, and I came to Edmonton on the train, and then I came out from the train. I caught a ride with a man that hauled the mail out to Iron River, and he was hauling the mail with team of horses. Team of horses in the winter time, and the road wasn't open for cars, so he hauled with a team of horses, and he gave me a ride as far as Iron River, and then the mailman at Iron River picked me up and went on to Sandy Rapids with the mail, and I stopped at his place and went in and had supper with them. And then he said after supper he'd take me home with a sleigh and team of horses. So he took me home, and I just walked to the door, and my sister opened the door and there I was. And they didn't know I was coming, but I was there, and of course the hugs and laughs, that all went with it.
Can you tell us a little bit more? So your sister opens the door.
Oh yeah, and then well, of course she hollered, "Hey, Willie's home, Willie's home," and my mother and father talked to them right away, and of course you had hugs and kisses and glad to see you. My brother was home already, the one that was in Italy. He had come home and he was there sitting on the chair too. So
what was his name?
Robert. So he had been sent home already. So, and I don't know, life just seemed to start to go on normal after that for a while.
So 3 boys went overseas.
Yes.
2 came home.
Yes.
As happy as your family was to see you, could you talk a little bit about the void left by John being killed? How palpable was that when you first came back?
Oh, there was a lot of sadness, of course, in the home because John didn't get back with us and he had been killed. But they had been in contact with John's wife, and by that time she had a baby girl, and she said she was coming to Canada, so there was something to look forward to. And I don't know, life seemed to go on. We just didn't dwell on it too much because what could you do? It went. And
could you please tell us about John McGregor? How would you describe your brother, his personality, anything? He
was the first one of us to join, and I think it was 41 or 42, the early part of 42. And he went overseas with the Calgary Highlanders, and he stayed with that regiment right through till he was wounded in France, and then he went back to the regiment again. John was quite a quiet guy. He didn't, there was not much fuss. He did learn to play the bagpipes with the Calgary Highlanders, and he did play them sometimes, but at some of their parades and that they had in England, they had a parade. Well, he might play the bagpipes there. Otherwise, he was quite quiet, and not much to say. He was typical farm boy. He's raised on the farm, and he was the middle child, yes. Robert was the oldest, and then John, and then myself. John was quite quiet. He didn't go out much. He didn't dance much or go to dances very much. We went to some parties and that, but he was quite quiet. He just liked to more or less sit down with a book and read and be alone. He wasn't one to play games much. We did play ball, softball, and some other games that we played with the group in Sandy Rapids, but nothing professional, just for fun.
And Mr. McGregor, if John had survived the war, what do you think he would have ended up doing with his life?
Oh. I imagine that he would have got a farm through Veterans Affairs. They were given some money to get farms, and for veterans could get loans from Veterans Affairs, and you could buy a farm. I imagine John and his wife would have settled on a farm, but it's hard to say. With a different partner, she may have wanted to go to a city or town, so this is very hard to say what you'd end up doing.
And how old was he when he was killed?
He was 24. His wife eventually came out to Canada and stayed for about a year, and then she decided to go back to England, and her and the girl went back to England. And but they came out a couple of times later, after the girl was grown up to about 10 or 11 years old. They came out the last time they were out there. She was about 10 or 11 years old, and just visited for a month and so, and then went back to England again. He had a very nice daughter. She was very intelligent and looked a very good looking girl. His wife never married again. She just stayed in England and settled there.
Did John ever get to meet his daughter?
No, he never seen his daughter. He was killed before she was born. He's buried at Grosbeck, and the graves are very well kept there at Grosbeck. They're a very nice cemetery. Well, I had a toothache when I got a toothache, and I had to go to a dentist in Bonneville to get it out, and so I took the bike, and I guess I was about 16 then. And I took the bike, and I rode to Bonneville in the morning and got my tooth out, but there was no freezing in them days. They didn't freeze teeth, they just, the dentist's nurse was his wife, and she held your head back while he reached in your mouth and just pulled the tooth out. And then I got on my bike and headed for home, but I got just as far as the Beaver River, which is about 12 miles from Bonneville, and I still had another 25 miles to go, and it started to rain, and it rained quite hard, and there was no gravel on the roads at that time. There were just trails, and it got quite muddy. So I couldn't ride the bike. So I had to push the bike about 15 miles home because I couldn't leave it, you know. The bikes were quite needed in them days because it was a way to travel. And pushed the bike anyway all the way home, and my tooth got better.
What was your dream before the war broke out? What were you planning on doing with your life?
Well, before the war broke out, I went to work out, and I went to, there was a neighbor, he was working for a man at St. Paul, Alberta, in the farm. He was quite a large farmer, and so he came home for a visit, and he came with a car, and we talked to him, and he said he needed another help down there at the farm. So I went back with him, and he gave me a job on the farm. I was doing the harrowing, what they called harrowing, behind the cedar. He had a man seeding and he put in about 1,000 acres. That at that time it was quite a large amount because they were doing it with horses, and And I had 6 horses on the harrows, pulling the harrows to harrow behind the seeder. And I did that all spring for all the land that he seeded. And then in the summertime, well, you were just fencing or doing other work like that. And it seemed you were always doing chores, of course. He milked a lot of cows, and you had to milk by hand. There was no milking machine. So there was 3 of us usually milked cows. And that was, started at 6 in the morning to get the cows ready to milk and washed and ready to milk. And then you would, after that, you would go for breakfast. After getting about 7:30 or 8 o'clock, you'd have breakfast. And then you'd hook up your horses and go in the field if you were still working on the field. Or if you weren't, well, you had other things to do, maybe haul hay to feed cattle that weren't out on pasture yet. And there was always, and he had a lot of pigs too, because there was pigs to feed and clean. And
how old were you when you were doing all this?
Well, I would be in 17, I guess. Yeah. And you're working for $15 a month was your wages. So you didn't have much money to spend. We didn't, there was not much to spend it on in the farm there.
And so a part of this deal was that you were given accommodation?
Oh yeah, we had there was I guess you'd call it, it was a place where the hired man stayed, a house, a building like. And the other hired man, there was 2 hired men and myself there. And we all stayed in the same building. We just had cots. And it was just a square building with nothing in it, only the cots. And we didn't cook in there or anything. We eat in the kitchen of their big house.
So Mr. McGregor, what was your game plan? Were you just doing this job to save up some money to go do something else? Or if the war had never broken out, this is what you would have kept doing?
That's hard to say. No, I don't think I would have kept doing it. I would have probably moved on to something else. But the idea was we were always coming home and helping at home too, you know, and eventually maybe starting farming on our own. In '39, well, the war started, but we were cutting grain with a binder. At the time we heard about it, and a neighbor there, we had went to cut grain for him. He lived across a creek, and we had to load the binder onto a wagon and then pull it across the creek with the horses because there was no bridge. And but we got across all right, and my brother and myself, and we cut this grain for him, and we got the binder loaded back on the wagon and started to come back across the creek. But anyway, we didn't hit exactly in the same spot as we went, and the wagon sunk down in the mud, and we got stuck. And we were prying it up with some poles and logs under it. And a neighbor, Jimmy Phelan, come along, and he says, "Oh, leave it there, boys. Go and join the army." The war started, you know. He was an old veteran from the First World War. And he Just leave it there and go and join the army. But anyway, we didn't leave it. We worked and got it out and went home with the binder. But then later, John, my brother, he joined the army, and then later than that, Robert joined the army. And then I joined it to the last one. I was coming 19. I wasn't quite as 18, coming 19. He was a veteran of the First World War. And we just went on from there through the war and back home and started farming. I bought a quarter of land from, it was a man named Walker, was his name, and he sold me his quarter of land. A quarter of land was 160 acres. And that 160 acres, he had about 20 acres cultivated on it, where he had taken the brush off and he had plowed it and cultivated it. And he had a house built, pretty good little house. And so I bought that farm off him. And then my mother had a quarter of land too that she had homesteaded. There was very little cultivation on it, but I bought it off her. I bought the one of Mr. Walker for $800 at that time for 160 acres. And the one from my mother, I paid her $500 for hers. And I started to farm, and I had already 2 horses, I guess, I had bought earlier, and some other equipment like a wagon, and so I had bought a seed drill and some more equipment that I needed, tillers and stuff. But 2 of my horses wasn't very good, but anyway, we worked with the 4 horses. But then in
what were you growing? What were you growing, the crops?
We grew oats and wheat mostly, and some barley too, if it depend on. Later on, we started to grow barley. When we had a lot of pigs, we were feeding pigs barley, so we started to grow barley. But after I was on the farm for a while, I had been seeing a girl at Iron River, Lorraine McGregor Peterson, and we got married, and she moved with me onto the farm, and we just started farming and raising kids. So that was the way it went till.
What was that like when you guys heard that the war had broken out? You're in Alberta. The war's going all the way in Poland and Germany.
Yeah.
And England. What was your reaction?
Well, you didn't think too much about it at first. First in 1939, it'll be over in a few months, and there's going to be nothing to it. But then it dragged on, and then Hitler took over more land, and then the Russians come into the war, and so forth. And so a lot of people were starting to get called up for, they had conscription in Canada, and you were called up whenever you were a certain age to go into the army, and we didn't wait till we were called up. You could volunteer if you wanted to go, but you would have been called up if you would have waited long. They started to call them up at about 20 years old and up to, I don't know, about 27 or 28 at first, from about 20 to 27, 28, and then.
And so your brother joined up. Did John talk to you guys and tell you guys his plan, or how did you find out John was going into the army?
Well, he was working out. He wasn't home. He was working out for other people, for farmers or for business people or whatever. He could get a job. And he ended up in Edmonton, and Mick Phelan, a neighbour of ours that lived across the road from us, one of his boys, Mick Phelan, they were talking and met in Edmonton anyway. So the both of them decided, well, we'll go and join the army. So that's just the way it happens. You don't have a job, so, well, we'll go and join the army, you know. Yeah, well, whenever I decided to go to the army, Tom Phelan, this Mick's brother, we were on the farm there, and Tom was 18, yeah, and he could go into the army at 18. So him and I decided, well, we would go to the army too, and that would leave my sister and two sisters at home to take care of the farm, because my dad got hurt, and his back got hurt, and he wasn't able to do too much work. So they were doing most of the work on the farm, looking after the livestock. But we went and we joined in Edmonton, and we took our basic training in Edmonton for 2 months, and then I was sent to Camp Borden. They put me in the medical corps, and I was sent to Camp Borden to take my training. And Tom, he went with the Edmonton Fusiliers, which was an infantry regiment, to take his training before he went overseas. But we were apart and never really seen each other much. But whenever we went on the boat, well, we went to Halifax. And then and I was with the medical corps. We went on about a week before the boat sailed, and to get familiarized with the boat in case of shelling or sinking or something, you know how the boat was. And we were on the boat about a week. And then there was trains coming from all over Canada to Halifax with soldiers for about a week to load this boat up. She had been refitted to haul soldiers from a passenger liner, and it's a very big ship. But anyway, Tom, I was in the boat and we were out in the ocean already going, and we only, in the Queen Mary, we only had a chance. There were so many troops aboard that we only eat once a day. So we would line up and get our mess tins full of food and go, and then the next morning you'd line up again, and there was a steady line all day going to get them all through. She was fitted for, I understood, 17,000 she was fitted for to haul. And we had about 26,000 aboard. So there was no room anywhere. The decks were all full and people were laying wherever they could. And the thing was to just get as many people on her as it could possibly hold. But I was sitting in I had a hammock, and I was sitting in my hammock, and I heard somebody at the door of our room that we were in asking for directions, and I recognized his voice. It was Tom Phelan, my friend that I had joined up the army with. And so we had quite a conversation then between the two of us, and it was really a surprise to see him. But then we went on to Greenock, Scotland, and from then we went on to you heard already.
Tell us about the journey across the Atlantic. What was that like, sir?
Crossing the Atlantic, she zigzagged all the time to be harder to hit with torpedoes. And she went wide open as fast as it possible could go. And it just took us 3 days from Halifax to Greenock, Scotland. And that was quite a quick trip for them days. But there was no, warships followed us out as far as Newfoundland. And then from there on, she was on her own. She just went as fast as she could go.
In chronological order, what is your background when it comes to schooling, sir? What grade did you make it to?
I was just grade 7. That's all that the school at Sandy Rapids. That's all as far as they teached, was grade 7, because there was that school was built. There was no school there for quite a few years, and then the kids were grown up, and some of them were, 10 and 12, 15 years old. And they were starting in grade 1, and the school was so full. It was a school built for about 30 people, 30 children, and there was over 60 in it, and one teacher. And they taught that there was one group, 30 group, would come in at 8 o'clock in the morning and go home at 12. And then another group would come at 12, another 30, and they would go home at 4. And just the one teacher. And it was quite hard on the teacher and hard on the students to learn, because you didn't have full time. And
it's amazing to me that you've only have grade 7 education, but you've self-taught yourself so much, to be able to run a farm. Obviously, you are educated. You know a lot, and so it's interesting that even though you don't have a lot of formal education, you are educated.
Well,
he's a very smart man.
Yeah.
Well, you just learned on your own.
But so yeah, it's just interesting. Yeah. I think that your generation, your parents' generation, you were matured at a much younger age.
Oh, I'm sure of that.
Like a 10-year-old was expected to be able to handle himself and do things.
Yeah.
Back then, that a 10-year-old today would be playing video games.
Yeah, that's right. A 10-year-old would be driving horses in the field, cutting hay.
And to be driving 6 horses.
Well, maybe a 10-year-old wouldn't likely be driving 6 horses, but he would be driving a team, maybe cutting hay with a mower, 2 horses, And then, I don't know, you just...
It's just the way it was.
Yeah, very different.
You survived off the land. You depend on the land to survive. You weren't worried about, where my money was coming from or anything. It was just, you were eating, and you had a place to sleep, and you didn't have to pay taxes. And what more do you need?
I think so much focus was just on the basic necessities,
on the
survival.
On the basic necessities and just survive. Yeah, before the war. Many of the families, that's what they did, just survive on the farm.
So my next question was, could you tell us about your training in Edmonton, please? Once you joined up, what was the basic training like in Edmonton, sir?
It was just basic training was just learning you how to march, learning you how to salute officers, and just to be just to be able to walk right, you know. You could walk, and you done exercises like running and jumping and a lot of this stuff just for exercise. I didn't have no problem walking or running, and because we were from the country, you know, and you were doing that all the time, so.
And when you went to Camp Borden to become a medic, can you tell us about the medical training you received?
Well, that was basic training, really. The medical training was very basic. And we took more in England afterwards, but in Camp Borden it was mainly learn the pressure points in the body to stop the bleeding, and how to put a tourniquet on, and how to bandage different parts of your body, you know, with bandages to stop bleeding. Main thing was stop the bleeding and evacuate, you know. If you didn't stop the bleeding, the rest didn't matter. See, the family back home was us all gone to the service. They didn't have as much income, so we sent them, John sent half his income, half his wages back home, and whenever I joined, I sent mine to back home, and Robert sent some money back home. But I was the last one to join of the family, so whatever I sent, the government would match it. So I was sending $25 a month home, and the government would send $25 a month. So they would get $50 from my wages. And our wages wasn't big in the Army. We started out with $1.30 a day. And whenever we went to England, we went up 10 cents to $1.40. And then when we went to France, they put us up to $1.70, so we were up another 20 cents a day. It sounds like nothing, but today you don't buy nothing for $1, but then you could. You didn't need no money anyway, because your boots and clothing and everything was supplied, your food was supplied, your bed, so you didn't need no money, and your money seemed to pile up, and you still have a little bit, you know, coming whenever we got out. Whenever we joined the Army, Tom Phelan and I, first day we got our uniforms. We thought, well, we'd walk downtown. We got our uniforms on, and we felt pretty smart. And we walked downtown, and we started downtown, and here they had told us whenever you pass an officer, you salute him, you know. So this mailman was coming along, and we didn't know he was a mailman. I had never seen a mailman on the farm, and we stepped up and saluted him nice, and he says, "Carry on, boys." And I guess he had a good laugh about us saluting him, but we didn't know he was a mailman or an officer, but we salute him anyway in case. That's how green we were. We were straight out of the bush, you know, and we didn't know much. We'd never seen a mailman before, so that's the way it was.
What was the furthest you had traveled? I know you were born in Northern Ireland, but you know, from Sandy Rapids, what was the furthest you had traveled outside of that area before the war?
Oh, just to Bonneville, to town. I had never been to Edmonton or before I joined up, or I had never rode a train before I joined up. We'd never been on a train. So we joined up, well then we went to Edmonton with a train, and it was all a new experience, you know, no matter what you were doing, it was different.
What was it like being in the city?
Well, but the city wasn't like it is today, you know. It was almost like the town that we came from, Bonneville. There just were stores along the streets, and it was so much different. Than
No skyscrapers.
Yeah, no skyscrapers and no tracks with trains running on them, or they had buses, but they had streetcars. Yes, they had streetcars in Edmonton then.
I did mean to go back to just to that education question.
Oh.
So after 7th grade, what did you do to maintain your education? Because obviously it's not like you only have a 7th grade level of understanding. Were you just reading a lot of books? What did you do to maintain and to learn more after your formal education stopped?
I don't know, just learned it naturally, just what, over time you pick it up, learn it. But while we were in England, you could take courses on schooling, like, and I did take a couple of courses on the winter that we stayed in England, which helped me a little bit. Especially math and stuff like that. I liked math. I was pretty good in it.
Thank you for sharing that. So you've taken us through your training. Is there anything you want to mention about your first train ride?
No, but I'll tell you, whenever we come home from the army, we're in Calgary, and we were home for we got to leave home for a month, and then we were told to come back and we would get discharged. And we went back, and I went back, and whenever I was coming back on the train from Calgary to Edmonton after being discharged, they give us $200 to buy clothes with, and what little wages you had coming, you got that too. But anyway, there was another soldier from Peace River happened to be there, and I sat down beside him on the train, and we were talking, and he said that he was going to Peace River, but you'd have to stay in Edmonton overnight to get the train to Peace River then. And he said he could stay with his uncle. He had an uncle in Edmonton that worked in the Parliament buildings as janitor in the Parliament buildings. So we got off the train, and so we walked, took our pack on our back, and we just walked across to the Parliament buildings. They weren't very far from where the CPR train got stopped. It was just maybe a quarter of a mile or something like that. We walked over there, and he talked to him, and he said, "Oh yeah, 4 o'clock I'm off, and I'll give you a ride back to my place, you know." He said, "I got lots of room in the basement there, and you can stay there overnight." So we rode back with him over, and he had this Model A, and I said, "This is what I need to go home with, is one of these things, you know, Model A car." And he says, "I'll sell it to you." So I said, "How much?" And he said he wanted $200 for it. Well, I said, "I only got $200, and I need money to buy gas. I couldn't buy it." And oh, he says, "I'll give it to you for $150. So I give him $150 for the car. And I still had $50 left, a bit more than $50 left. And I was able to buy myself a suit of clothes at Hudson Bay store. And I think for $40, I got a suit with 2 pair of pants and a suit waistcoat and a suit jacket. But
what about the gas?
But it was full of gas whenever I got it, so that run me home. That was enough to take me home. And I had, I still had $5 or $10 left. And so I started home and got home. But anyway, Tom and I, after the war, we thought we were going to go back to Edmonton and maybe look for a job or see what was going anyway there after we got home a week or two afterwards. And the roads were very rough. It was just gravel roads all the way to Edmonton. And we got there, and just before you get to Edmonton, where the Air Force base is now, they had pavement about 2 miles. The pavement past the Air Force base. So we drove there, and so it was nice and smooth, you know, and it was nice with the car on the pavement. And Tom says, let's turn around and do it again. So we turned around, went back, and drove back on that pavement another back, just because it was so smooth and just to feel the ride.
It's amazing, just the simple things that people just take for granted now.
Yeah.
Because the whole journey there was very gravelly.
Yeah.
That one smooth spot.
Yeah. Then we did it twice.
Thank you again for taking the time to talk to me, sir. Could you please tell me, how did you end up as a medic in the first place? Once you went to Edmonton and then Camp Borden, how was it was decided that you were a medic?
I don't know. I didn't decide that. They as you're taking your basic training, and they have somebody supposed to be, the ones that are giving you your basic training, they're kind of watching you and deciding where you would fit in, you know, in the army. Whether you're better to go to the infantry, or you're better to go as a driver, or to the Army Service Corps, or what you would want. And somebody decided that I should be a medic. So that's where I went, to Camp Borden to learn.
Let's jump forward. So once you get to England, can you tell us a little bit about your memories training in England before you went to the continent, before you went to France? What are your memories of being stationed in England, sir? Well,
our training in England was mostly on the body, where you'd stop the bleeding, mainly stop the bleeding, and how you have to do it. You have to use your own imagination, and many times when you see a wound, because they're all different. There's no set way, that there's just one way that they shoot you, or a piece of mortar hits you or something. But you would maybe wrap a bandage real hard, wrap a bandage real hard, and have to push it into the wound to stop the bleeding. You'd push it in tight, and then put bandage over top. And I had even picked up a rock and wrapped bandages around it, a small rock, and wrapped bandages around it and pushed it into a wound to help to stop the bleeding. Because if you can't stop the bleeding, well, the rest don't matter. He'll be dead before you get him to the hospital.
Could you please tell us, when you were in England, first of all, thank you for sharing that, but when you were in England, before you guys went over to France, what do you remember about the buzz bombs, the rockets, the German V1s, the V2s?
Well, we were at a town not too far from London. It was, it was quite a way, but Horsham was the name of the town that we were in England. Most of the time I was in. And we could see the buzz bombs going over into London from where we were at, and see the fighters trying to shoot them down. So it was something to see too. And then we were, while we were there, we did, you know, we were called on to help where there was bombs dropped and there was buildings knocked down and possible people inside that you'd have to just, you know, help get the mortar out of the way. And there's no way specially you had to do it. It just, everything was different, you know,
So you're saying in England, you guys were assigned to help with some of the destruction,
yeah,
the casualties, and the civilians?
Very little, but we went to go to France. We went to London, and we were in small tents in Hyde Park in London, and just rows and rows and rows of us, of tents. And then we went on the boat at Tilbury Docks in London. That's where we got onto the boat, and we went to France from there.
And tell us about that journey, please. Going to France, how long after the invasion was this?
Well, it was during the invasion we went, you know. I don't know, they said they started on the 6th of June, and I'm not sure, but I think I arrived on the 9th of June in England. But we were on the boat before, but the sea was very rough at first there, and we were kept on the boat longer than they planned on, you know, till it calmed down a little bit before we got down onto the landing craft and went for shore. I can remember afterwards, and now I don't know how long this was after we were off the boat, but we were close to a wall, a sea wall, and we had to get the Jeep close to the wall, and we had to put the fan belt on, because they took the fan belts off whenever the Jeep went through water to get off their landing craft. And then we were putting the fan belt on before we went any further. And then, I don't know, we landed up, I was at a holding station there, that a casualty station, I should say, where casualties come, and we was using the Jeep for, I can't tell you how long because I can't remember, but for some time hauling casualties from the casualty station to these barges that was coming in, bringing in soldiers. And whenever they were unloaded, we'd load on casualties and take them back out to the ships that was there. Now, the time, I can't remember how long we did this.
So don't worry about the times and the places. We're a lot more just interested in the human stories.
Yeah.
Can you please tell me about some of the casualties you saw?
You name it and you saw it. It could be anything, you know, lose the arms, lose the legs, and shot in the body or in the shoulders, and just different places, so many different places. Had one experience with, we were driving up a laneway with the Jeep going towards the front lines, and there was a soldier laying in the ditch. At first I thought he was dead, you know. But then we stopped and I rolled him over and he was still alive. But he had been hit by a piece of a mortar shell and it just tore his insides right out just about. And he had dragged himself through the ditch there, and he was all dirt and mud and blood. But anyway, we put him on the jeep, on the stretcher, and got him on the jeep and took him back to the doctor. And we left him there. So, but anyway, he was able to talk a little bit. He was calling for his mother, and after he was with the doctor, then the doctor said, put him in the shade, you know, and I put him putting him in the shade, and he kept saying, don't leave me, don't leave me, but you have to leave him. You know, but he died there, of course. The ambulance wasn't in to take him any further, and the doctor said there was no use. He was too far gone to try to go out with a jeep with him, you know. But things like that happen, and doctor said to us one time, I was asking about what happened to this guy or that guy that we brought in, you know, if he's still alive or did he die? And he said, you just think about today, what happened yesterday. Think about what happened yesterday, forget about it. You done your best, think about today, you know. That was his theory, you know. You had to think about today, not what happened yesterday, because you done your best. You know. So that was the motive there. You do what you can. I don't know. There's not much else we could talk about, I don't think.
I really appreciate you opening up and sharing that story, sir. I'm sorry that you had to go through that.
Oh, it's not one, but it was many. Many, many, many casualties we hauled. After the doctor looked at him and he called us and told us, well, just he gave him a heavy shot of morphine probably, and he said just take and put him in the shade, you know, and cover him with a blanket. And we did, and as we set him down, he said to me, don't leave me, you know. Yeah.
Is there anything that you found out about the soldier, who he was, or?
No, I never found. You can't. You know, it's just too much. You can't start following one person. That's what the doctor meant. What happened yesterday, forget about it. It's today we're worried about. Yeah. So, I don't know. Yeah.
And you know, your job as a medic, you know, can you tell us the difference between what you were doing and what the aid man attached to the company would be doing, you know? Cause,
yeah, well, he'd be doing similar, only we were evacuating them. We were getting them on the stretcher and getting them out. But sometimes we were putting on bandages too, you know, if it was more than... If there was only one or two, maybe he had them bandaged, you know. But then we'd just pick them up and take them out. But if there's more, you know, or Oh, it's hard to say. Or if he was hurt, you know, well, then you end up helping. Do what you can.
You had told us that, you know, you've seen all sorts of injuries, wounds. For the soldiers, you know, who had a leg or an arm blown off, you know, how would you treat that? What would you do, sir?
Well, you have to put a tourniquet on to stop the bleeding as quick as you could. If it was blown off with a mine, like a foot blown off or something like that, there was very little bleeding because the heat of the mine cooked the meat, cooked the flesh, and it didn't, well, it would bleed, but not a lot of bleeding like you'd think might be, because of the heat of the mine would cook it. And as the flesh was cooked, well, it wouldn't bleed so much. If you can imagine that. It's hard to. But you had to be careful, because if you try to put a bandage on one that had been blown off, you'd pull the flesh away from the bone. It would leave the bone, you know, quite easy, because it's cooked. It's just like putting a roast in the oven.
And when it comes to soldiers, a lot of the veterans who I've interviewed who are medics, you know, talk about the difficulty of treating soldiers with stomach wounds.
See, we weren't going to treat them wounds. So our job was to get them back, you know. So, and we did treat some wounds all right, like on the field. If they were still not treated, no bandage on, well, you try and do it. And we did lots of it, but I don't know, it was stop the bleeding and evacuate. Those are the words.
Can you give us an idea, roughly how far, after you pick up a wounded soldier, how far would you have to travel to get back to the RAP?
Oh, anywhere from a quarter of a mile to maybe a mile or 2 miles, even at odd time. Very seldom that far, mostly within a mile. The RAP tried to get as close as they could, and reasonable safe, you know, without being shot right at. Still could be artillery, but you can't stop everything. Oh.
And could you describe the RAP? What would it look like, the whole setup, sir? Was it a tent?
Sometimes there was a tent, but we tried to get into a building where they could. They had a big truck, must have been 3-ton truck, would hold all the equipment, you know, from the RP. And the doctor had a Jeep, and the padre used to live with the doctor, stay with the doctor most of the time. And it'd be him, and they would have a driver, of course. And I don't know, they just moved. I don't know how I wasn't planning where they went, you know, somebody else did that. But anyway, they stopped, and wherever they stopped, we stopped. And that was our place they were going to set up. And mainly they just they had a table, and then they had a place where you could set stretchers on, kind of a steel frame. You could set a stretcher on so the doctor could look at the wounded, and very little. You're moving it, you know. And he wasn't going to do much operating or anything on him, but just to see that he wasn't bleeding too much, you know. Try to stop the bleeding, that was the main thing. Because if they lose the blood, well, what do you got, you know? Nothing.
Could you tell us, please, about your experiences using morphine?
I had very little experience using morphine. It just, you could, if it was needed, you could use it, yes. But mostly the morphine was given by the doctor, you know, most of the time. But very, very seldom that you. And if we were picking up a wounded man, and we might have to give him morphine if you thought his pain was too great, you know, or I don't know. You just do what you can. Yeah.
And could you please tell us about, were you the one driving the Jeep, or what was...
No, it had a driver, always had a driver. Yeah.
So what was the setup? There was a driver and then two of you?
One.
Stretcher bearers?
Just one, myself, and a driver with a Jeep. And we mostly stayed at the RAP, you know, wherever they were, and then say a call would come in, B companies having heavy casualties, you know, or V companies going to advance on the part of the town, and there will be casualties, and then you would have to get up in there and pick up the casualties as they would come. But
how many would you be able to carry at a time?
we could put on 3 stretcher cases, 2 on top, and one where the passenger sits, you know, would go back to the back seat. You see the way they put the metal frame up on the Jeep to hold 3 stretchers. And then I usually stood up in the middle because especially at night, if it was dark, you couldn't put lights on. There's no lights because, and the road might be shell holes in the road, so you had to. I stood up on the middle of the Jeep and held on to the front windshield, but there was no glass in the windshield, there was just a frame there. And I could see straight down onto the road better than the driver could. And you could hope you weren't going to drive into a shell hole. And at night was really bad. But that was I don't know.
Are there any other experiences that stick out about nighttime? Some of the things you had to go through?
Well, I have walked alongside the Jeep to try to make sure he didn't drive into a shell hole. My hand on the fender and just walk beside him to make sure he got out of the place we were getting him out. Maybe not all the way, but you know, to part away where it was been heavily shelled or something. You had never been on these roads before, so you were trying to get out. There's all new laneways, maybe in a road or in a town, you know, and it's you have to figure out where you're going.
And this is because you guys had to put blinders on the lights, right?
No, you couldn't put a light on. No lights, no blinders or nothing. There's just no lights. I mean, if you put a light on, somebody's going to shoot you for sure. Because, you know, but same as in London, or same as in where we were staying, where in Horsham there, people didn't have no lights in the house, you know. They had lights, but their blinds were black. So there was no light getting out. You know, at the house.
Could you please tell me about any experiences you had with German airplanes. Were you guys ever strafed or bombed?
We were both strafed and bombed, yeah. But if it was in the daytime, our Air Force, if the German Air Force was up, our Air Force was up there too, and they were pretty good to take care of them, you know. But at night, the German Air Force did do some flying at night and dropping bombs. Yeah. But the German Air Force was almost eliminated, you know, quite quick after they got into Europe, because they bombed their airfields. Once their airfields was bombed, well, it didn't matter how many planes they had, they couldn't get them off the ground. You know, if you put big holes in the airplane. Our air power was way more than theirs. Yeah, but they had good planes too, but still.
Could you please tell us about the difficulty of fighting in the hedgerows?
In the hedge?
In the hedgerows?
Yeah.
A lot of the Normandy veterans who I meet talk about just how difficult it was to progress.
Oh, to get through a hedgerow. Oh, yeah. Hardly a rabbit could get through. Yeah, I never tried to. I don't know really too much.
But did that make your job evacuating casualties difficult? Because
yes, you had to get around the hedgerows somehow. And I don't know. Hedgerows, I don't think bothered us that much. Some people it may have, sometimes, I don't know, but we were usually able to find a way around it, you know, because you know you couldn't get through it, so. Especially, you got a Jeep, you know, so you could maybe walk through it someplace, but you could never get through with a Jeep. So we had to find a way around it, and that was our.
Did you have any experiences, or could you please tell us about some of your experiences picking up wounded Germans?
Well, I picked up one wounded, well, it was picked up. I didn't pick up many wounded Germans. The Germans were pretty good at taking their wounded back with them. That's one, they didn't leave wounded around, but I did have, in Holland, we were coming up a street just with a Jeep, just coming up, not going any place in particular, just going. And this Dutch man, he opened the door and waved at us, and we stopped, and he waved to come in, and I went in, and there was a German officer laying on the floor with his, he'd been shot through the upper part of the leg here. And so we bandaged him a little bit, and they had been bandaged by the Dutch guy, had cut his pants down and had put a towel in there on the wound, and that, but I put a bandage on it anyway, and we put him on the stretcher, and we took him back because we wasn't that busy. We were more or less just looking for work, but anyway, he had a revolver on him with a holster and belt and all, and I took that off and I threw it under the Jeep, the back seat of the Jeep you could lift up, and I threw that under there, and I kind of forgot about it, but after a month or so, I was cleaning the Jeep or something and lifted the seat, and here this revolver was still there. I took it to my kit bag and put it in. I brought it home with me. There was a Luger 9mm Luger. And so things like that. Same as I brought home a nice pair of binoculars that I scrounged out of a submarine. When we were taking people out of the submarine, well, these were in the captain's room, and so I picked them up and brought them home.
Thank you for sharing that. Could you please tell us about the Red Cross? How prominent was the Red Cross on your uniform and on the Jeep?
Well, there you can see it on the Jeep here. It's very good.
So the camera can't really see that, but
No.
if you...
Well, they had the Red Cross was on the hood of the Jeep, and was on the both sides were smaller Red Cross. See, there's no doors on the Jeep. The Jeep didn't have doors. You could just jump in and out quick.
And what about your uniform?
And we had Red Cross on her arm. Her arm was Red Cross, her arms. Just the common Red Cross that you would see. And
did you feel like that protected you? I've heard stories of Germans picking off medics.
they did too, but I don't know if it protected you or not. You wore it because you're supposed to wear it, so. Yeah, you had a Red Cross on your helmet too, on the front of your helmet and the back.
Did you have any situations where you felt Germans were singling you guys out, firing at you guys?
No, I can't say that I ever. No, I don't think so. That I know of it.
Mr. McGregor, you told us the story about saving that lady who had stepped in the mine.
Yeah.
Did you have any other experiences treating civilians or evacuating civilians?
I didn't. If we had any people of our own to do, they came first, our own. But I did take some women and some children in the Jeep and took them back to a clearing station or something. Somebody else took care of them, just to get them out of where they would get to a medical place. But I never really went as that my job, taking civilians. No, wasn't my job. I took them, it was the soldiers first, and then if there was a wounded civilian there, yes, we'd take them out. There's many times we were under shell fire, you know, but I lost one driver from shell fire, and it was, we were driving on a road going up towards the front, and all of a sudden the mortar shell dropped in front of us, and then one behind us, and then another one in front or close to, and the Jeep got hit, or some pieces went through the radiator of the Jeep, and I went in one ditch and he went in the other. And after the shelling was over, they had a few more mortar shells dropped, but not really close, and it was over. I got up out of my ditch and went, and he had been hit and killed. And his had come too close and it blew right up. So the Jeep was out of order. So I don't remember how I got back, but whether somebody picked me up or I got back, but I got back to the REP, and And we got another driver shortly and another Jeep. But that was, and he was killed. I don't know. I didn't, I don't remember how I got back. There's just so much confusion. I don't remember how I got back. Whether I walked back or run back or somebody picked us up or what happened, but it just happened. My mind went blank, I guess.
I'm sorry that you have to go through that. I mean, that's such a close call. He was.
Yeah.
If you had switched places, it would have been you that could have been killed.
Well, yeah, but he was on his driver's side, so he went that way. I went this way. You know.
And so that's incredible. So that was the German mortar, and this was in Normandy.
Yeah, it was Normandy.
Did you guys have any experiences with German snipers or under small arms fire?
We picked up wounded that's been hit with snipers, all right, but I don't think I've ever had them shooting at me. I'm not sure about that, but I don't think so.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. McGregor, but as a medic, you don't carry weapons, right?
No.
Could you mention that, please?
No, as a medic, we didn't carry weapons. The driver was allowed to have a Sten gun, and but we didn't carry weapons in the Jeep whenever we were out.
Did you feel vulnerable? A lot of the men who I interview, they say that when you're in combat, if you don't have your rifle and if you don't have a helmet, you feel like you're naked.
Well, that's probably so, yeah. I mean, what good would a rifle done me anyway if I had one, you know? I mean, sure, maybe you could have shot somebody that was already wounded and shot him again, but I mean, that's... I don't know. I never missed it. Didn't feel anything wrong with it, not having it.
Well, you were just called for something else. I mean, your job was to save lives, right?
Yeah,
not
right.
take them.
Yeah, not take them. So if you didn't have a rifle, well, you didn't have a rifle.
But when you were evacuating some of the wounded soldiers, were there times that you could see up ahead the German infantry running around?
No, I couldn't say that I did see the German infantry. If I could have seen them, been lots of other people seen them, and they've been shooting at them, you know. So I know they were there, but I didn't know they were, you know. I didn't see them, no.
So when you guys would go to pick up the wounded, would the riflemen, would they have carried the wounded to a place to make it easy for you to go pick them up, or are you picking them up where they were wounded?
Both, but the men were always good to help you load the stretcher on the Jeep and help in any way they could if they were there, not just happened to be standing behind a building or something, you know. And I'm sure that at times they drug, you know, wounded to say you got hit on the road and they drag you in behind a building or something to save you. It's, I couldn't say, you know, that because you don't know for sure.
What would you do to be the source of encouragement? You know, you're dealing with so many boys that are wounded, some seriously, some not as seriously. But when you're putting them up on the stretcher, what are you saying to them to keep them encouraged?
Oh, very little. Just get them on the stretcher and get on, and probably did say something to them. I don't remember what I said. That's a long time ago when you were in the heat of battle or something. You can't remember things. Your mind don't work.
I mean, you have an incredible memory, though. Your recall is.
Yeah, but
That story you told us about the lady who you saved
yeah,
when you went behind the German lines.
yeah.
What happened the next day?
Oh, I don't know.
Well, when they saw your Jeep, when the Canadians finally came up,
Yeah.
they pushed forward the next day, right?
Yeah, well they just told me she find your unit and get back to it. I wrote it in there,
Okay.
you know, and I did do that, so.
So going back to just your time in Normandy, could you just tell us a little bit about the living conditions, please? Where did you guys end up sleeping, eating?
You slept wherever you could, sleeping standing up almost. But a lot of times in the back seat of the Jeep.
And what about you? What would you guys be eating? Rations or?
Yeah, you're eating rations, yes. You had rations.
You had told us the story about the driver who was killed
Yeah,
when you were out on that one run.
yeah.
That was a very close call. Are there any other situations like that? Other close calls that stick out?
Oh, I don't know. I suppose there was many, but I don't know. Nothing to talk about, no. I'm not gonna go into.
Could you please tell us about coming back? You told us about coming home, seeing your family for the first time, but did you have any difficulties readjusting to civilian life?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. I readjusted civilian life pretty quick. 2 years after I got home, I got married, and so then once you're married, you know, ask Mike there, you adjust pretty quick.
A lot of the veterans who I meet, though, you know, they talk about having dreams about the war or loud noises would bother them.
Yeah,
Did any of that?
it used to. Not so much anymore, no.
So that's what I'm saying. When you first came home,
Oh yes, very much. Very much. Wake up at night, sweat and sleep, you know, just. Wife would say, get back in bed here. But, I don't know. You got over it a little bit, but you never will get really over it. But you do get better.
do you remember the first time you went back with your wife?
Well, we went just to the graveyard on our own without anybody else with us. And we found out from the caretaker there that they have a book in their little building there where the caretaker stays, and it's all the names of the soldiers that's buried in that graveyard, and it gives the number of the grave, you know, that you're. So we found that, and then we went to the grave and brought flowers for the grave, and stayed there for a little while and went home again. That's quite. Nothing more you could do. It was taken care of very well. It was maintained. The Dutch people had, but the Dutch kids, every Christmas Eve, and I think they still do it, the schools march their kids from the school up to the graveyard, and they place a flower on every grave. The kids do. A candle, yes, I'm sorry. They place a candle on every grave. Yeah, and they light that and it'll stay lit for 12 or 14 hours or something.
So that first time you saw John's grave, you know,
Yeah.
your wife, what,
Yeah.
I believe that was the 50th anniversary of the war.
That was the 50th anniversary of the war, yeah.
So it had been 50 years, 51 years almost since you'd seen him.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what was that like?
Well, just like going to see any grave, your family graves, you know, you feel sad about it. But that's it. I mean, you can't do anything about it.
What would you want to see future generations do to make you feel like the sacrifice John made was worth it?
Boy, that's beyond me to tell what the future will be. The future generations would do.
But what would you want to see them do? I mean, you also risked your life.
Yeah, but, well, I do think that these, they should be kept up, these memorials and stuff like that, kept them up, you know, not to let them deplete and be poorly looked after. That should be part of either the government or the people that lives in the district take care of it.
I guess another way to ask the question, Mr. McGregor, is what advice do you want to give to future generations? Like your grandkids, your great-grandkids, your great-great-grandkids. You're 101, you know, you have a lot of wisdom. What's something you want them to know for their life, sir?
Yeah. Put good politicians into the government so we wouldn't have wars. They could settle them without wars. War doesn't settle nothing. It just kills a lot of people. That's my advice to them.
After the war, you know, you had the farm, you raised your family, but when you retired, you became a very active person in Bonneville. You've contributed a lot. You've jump-started a lot of organizations. Can you talk a little bit about your motivation? How come you don't just have a quiet life, you know, in retirement?
Yeah.
Your daughter, the way she said it is, you've made a genuine effort to make the world a better place for other people every day.
Well, I think we'll leave it like that, what she said there. It's should be other people's opinion, not mine, what you've done. You know, whoever does volunteer work, they do good job. There's Mike and Aggie there. They cook breakfast every Sunday morning on the first Sunday in every month at the senior center. And that's a lot of work too. Yeah. So if everybody helps a little, it's not much work. It's more fun than work.
What kind of man do you want people to always think of you as, Mr. McGregor?
What kind of a man?
Your friends and your family, right, when they think of you, what are the characteristics that you would want to come to mind?
Oh, I don't know. I never asked them what to think of me, so I wouldn't know at all. That's for what they think of you.
I guess, like, what's the most important thing? That you're a good father, a good husband, hardworking, a volunteer, a World War II veteran? What are the things that matter to you?
Yeah, I think so. That is wind of, yes.
All the above?
I tried to take care of my family and seen they got a decent education and everything like that. grandchildren are all, so far, they look like they're doing very good. The ones that, and my children did very well too. They made a good home for themselves and the family. That's about all anybody could expect. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So the only other thing, there was when you were telling us first about John, I don't know if you'd mentioned the fact that he got married when he was wounded.
Yeah, after, yeah.
Could you just make sure that we have that? Just that part, how he got wounded, he got married, and she was was she pregnant? Because they were going steady before, right?
Well, I don't know too much about that part.
I just meant like, because he didn't get to meet her.
I know she, the baby was born after he died anyway. And they were married before the baby was born. Yes, whenever he went back to England and he recovered from his wound, they decided that Connie and him decided to get married. But I don't think he was aware of her being pregnant. Whenever he went back, they sent him back to his unit after he got better. And then he was killed just in February, I guess, February 27th, he was killed in Germany, or just crossing into Germany in the Siegfried Line. Yeah.
Had you met Connie yourself?
Yes, I did meet Connie. I met her one time in, I forget the name of the town anyway, but we did meet, and we had lunch together or something like that.
So this was the three of you?
Yeah, the three of us, yeah. He had been, see, he was in England a lot longer than I was. He was there for a couple of years, you know, so they had been going together for quite a while. And then they had been planning on getting married, but then they decided that they wouldn't because he was going to France, so they didn't get married, I guess. But then he got wounded and come back, and he didn't expect to be going back to the lines again, but they needed them there, so they sent him back.
Did you know that he got married when you saw him before he got killed, the two days before he was killed? Did you know he had been married?
No, I didn't know until he told me. He told me he was married, and whenever we were talking at the, yeah.
I mean, what a way to find out, right?
Well, I mean, he got married, he got married. I mean, you didn't think too much about it.
And at that time, though, because if he told you he was married, he would have also told you that he was expecting to be a father, but you don't think he knew.
I don't. He didn't tell me he was expected to be a father, so I don't know if he knew or not. You know, we had only 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes to talk. You know, we mostly talked about the family. You know, home family. Because my dad wasn't too well while doing the war. He had a bad back, and so we're probably talking about that, the farm and that stuff.
And that was the only time you saw him in France. On the continent, right?
Yeah, it's the only time I saw him in France. Yeah, in Holland.
Holland, yeah. That must have been such a nice thing.
Well.
Because Robert was all the way in Italy, right?
Yeah, right. He was in Italy.
This sounds odd, but that conversation you had with John, that 10, 15-minute conversation, did you feel anything unusual about it? that might be the last time you see him?
Oh, I never thought of that for sure, you know, no. But I think I remember telling him he shouldn't have come back, you know, because he did volunteer to go back. Or they were, I'm not sure, I shouldn't say that. I don't know if he volunteered to come back or not, or whether he was sent back, or he probably was sent back.
But you told him he should have stayed.
I told him he should have stayed in England if he could have. You're married, you should have stayed in England. Well, I guess he couldn't do it. They said he.
What was his demeanor? I mean, was he at that particular time? Was he doing okay?
Oh yeah, he was doing okay, sure. Yeah. He had been shot through the ear. Right here, it went through and come out here, but it didn't damage his. You know, it damaged his hearing. He couldn't hear in that ear, but otherwise he was healthy.
And he was a Bren gunner.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, I really appreciate you filling in that gap, sir. The last thing is, I believe your daughter had mentioned there was a story about your father when you came back home.
Oh, but that's not the army stories. That's my father. He got hurt. Well, he was building a stack of green feed, and he fell off the stack. The bundle slipped and he fell off, and he landed with his back across the rack, on the hay rack, if you know what that is. And he never really got over it. He got to walk afterwards, but you know, he didn't. He stayed at home. He was to the doctor, but then they sent him home again, and because they couldn't do much about it, and just stay at home and rest, and so he stayed. But he stayed. He was still alive when we all come home. So then I thought that we should maybe get him to Edmonton to see a specialist, and maybe he could do something about it. And so we took him to Edmonton. Robert took him to Edmonton to specialist, and they couldn't do much about it, I guess, so they kept him there in the hospital, but he passed away about a month later. He was just, I think he was just staying alive till we got home, and otherwise he was pretty down, you know. It's.
I wonder how much John's death affected his health.
Oh, no way of knowing. I don't know.
Was he a First World War veteran?
No. He was just a farmer from Ireland.
Well, I know it must have meant so much to the family, to your mom and dad, that they, and your sisters, that you and Robert did come.
Yeah.
I mean, like you told us earlier about that reunion.
Yeah. Well, it wasn't much of a reunion. It was just meeting your family again. There was no other people there or anything.
When you first came home, those first few years, did you talk at all about your experiences?
No, I didn't talk at all about my experience. Anybody that was in the war and that suffered a lot of experiences, they never talked about it. The ones that wasn't in there but were maybe fairly close or was in some other branch, you know, they're the ones that talked about it. They knew all about it.
The guys who didn't see action talked more.
Yeah. Ones that didn't see action done the talking. So. Ones that seen the action didn't talk much. It's nothing to talk about, you know.
So we're all done, sir. My
Yeah.
organization, Remember WWII, and our partners or do we have your permission to use this interview?
Yes. Yes.
I very much appreciate that.
Yeah, these are the three the buddies we were trained with, and they went overseas with me, and I think they died in the war.
And you took the photo?
Yes, I took this photo. Yes, this was taken in England.
And then if you could just point to your photo, please.
Yeah, and this is a photo of me in England.
The good-looking one? And
This is a model that my grandson made up as what our Jeep was like when we had in the army. The Red Cross on front and stretchers on top.
and if you just turn it towards me, please. If you turn it all the way. Yeah, if you just turn it around, please, sir. There you go. Thank you so much.
This is a photograph of me. This was taken in Antwerp during the war. We had time off there in Antwerp. We had a few days that we were kind of on. We had time off, so we went and had a picture taken.
That was perfect. I'm just going to hold it up a little bit, please, sir. And then a little to your... Yeah, I'm trying to get it so it doesn't put a shadow on. You might have to put it on the other side, Mr. McGregor. Yeah, maybe if you just use one hand.
Down?
No, if you just use one hand, maybe. There you go. The other hand. So it doesn't block your face.
Oh, okay.
All right. And if you... Yeah.
Yeah.
And just give me a big smile.
Yeah. This is my brother John. He was killed in the war. He was killed in Germany during the war.
How old was he?
He was 24 years old.
This is just a close-up of you. So I'll have you look that way, please.